One of my all-time favorite memories of living in the basin is staring out at a clear summer sky, barefoot in the grass, with my 2-year-old son on my shoulders while I dance with a few hundred of my fellow Kootenayites. Everyone is singing along to Michael Franti's song, Stay Human, a tune he dedicates to all the freaky people out there. The year is 2001, and I had just moved to the Kootenays from the city 2 years before. And here I am, grooving at this funky little music festival on the east shore of Kootenay Lake called Starbelly Jam, with my young kid listening to lyrics that are telling me, don't believe in the system. Franti is barefoot himself with big long dreadlocks, and he can't stop looking up at the Purcell Mountains and giving grace and praise. He says something like, "You live in a beautiful, beautiful place, and looking at y'all, I'm sure you're going to do your best to keep it that way." The people cheer and scream and dance freely. I feel like I've found something really, really special. Like I've absolutely made the right decision to live here. And Franti is right. We need to protect this place. Protect our freedom, our expression, our uniqueness with everything that we have. Franti sings, "All the freaky people make the beauty of the world." And in that moment, when I hear him sing those words, I know I want to be one. My son holds on to my ears for dear life as I rock away, dive into the music, singing with my new freaky friends and family. The power and emotion of his art move through me to my very core, shifting my perspective. And in that moment, Franti's art changed me. I'm Mitchell Scott, Editor-in-Chief at Kootenay Mountain Culture Productions, and this is The Headwaters, brought to you by Columbia Basin Trust. The power of art to move and connect humans on both individual and collective levels has long been celebrated. As a species, it's simply in our DNA to create. In this episode, we'll talk to writers, visual artists, storytellers, and arts professionals, people whose work and creative practices in the Kootenays are helping to create systems change. We'll also learn about what can happen when a full orchestra plays on and for a remote glacier. This and more in our episode on Arts for Change with writer Emily Nielsen. In our first story, Emily's going to share some conversations she had with 3 people who are using art to create connections, not just for themselves, but across and through multiple communities. Emily, welcome back to the Headwaters.
Hey, Mitch. Happy to be here.
So I'll get right to it. Why do you think our world needs art?
You know what? I actually spend a lot of time thinking about that question.
Why is that?
Well, our world is pretty complicated these days.
Oh, you don't say.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are genuinely trying to figure out how they can contribute to any one of the many issues we're facing. Like, I'm a writer. I write poetry and lyric essays, but admittedly, that can sometimes feel too abstract for the very direct solutions our planet needs.
I get that, and I like your poetry.
Thank
you. Perhaps it's good. Perhaps you feel like you're not exactly on the forefront of change.
Yeah, except deep down, I know that's not exactly true. I'd say right now, artists have an even more important role to play. Good art can get between the cracks of science, news, or politics. It works on that subtle, often invisible level that actually makes people feel deeply, not just factually.
And to do anything, we definitely need to feel it first.
For sure.
Okay, well, I'm feeling like I want to meet some of the folks here in the basin who are working with art on that profound yet subtle level you mentioned.
Yeah, let's start at the north end of Kootenay Lake in Argenta, where I spoke with actor, playwright, folklorist, and spoken word artist Shayna Jones. That's Shayna, singing and on percussion. She specializes in the traditional oral storytelling of African and Afro-diasporic lore. I started out by asking about her project, Black and Rural, which she describes as an artistic inquiry into the hearts and minds of Black folks tucked away on Canada's countryside.
So I live in a very remote and rural, rustic location, and I don't often have the opportunity to meet and hear from other Black folks who have chosen to live a life that is so outside of kind of what's more popularly accepted or expressed when it comes to Black life, meaning urban. Black life and Black culture is often associated with urban existence and urban music and urban dress and urban dance. And so the beginnings of this project was me actually just wanting to hear others and speak to subjects that I don't often get to hear spoken to, and to get to hear from Black folks who are often overlooked because we're not at the epicenter of where folks go to find the Black stories they're looking for, you know.
So in a sense, Shayna put a call out to a community she knew was there, but hadn't necessarily fully connected with.
Yeah, here's Shayna talking about how those initial conversations evolved.
I couldn't help but want to braid and weave and tease out the sense of the folkloric that can be present amongst Black folks who are drawing near to the land and who are diving into their heritage. And so Black and Rural, yes, began as a series of conversations and is going to continue to live as a continued gathering of conversation and story and perspective. But it's evolved into also being a vehicle for honoring these Black and rural stories and empowering Black and rural folks, empowering urban Black folks who never imagined that they could have a life directed towards drawing near to the land and to deeper knowledge from our heritage.
Very fascinating stuff. Can we listen to any of these stories?
We can. blackandrural.com is the place to go.
Incredible. Someone living way up at the north end of Kootenay Lake, not too many people up there, has created a platform to connect African descent rural Canadians from across the whole country.
Yeah, and this is just one of the many projects Shayna's worked on. When I asked her thoughts on how art can create change, she said that for her, it's about focusing on the work that goes down and in rather than things that go big and up and out.
I am more drawn to creating and being a part of and living things that make me want to show up in my own life a little bit differently. And I believe deeply in the small and the hidden and the quiet. I believe deeply in the seed that is buried under the ground, you know, and just waits for the moment to sprout.
For Shayna, creative work that comes out of quiet attention holds an important kind of power.
So with storytelling and spoken word or the listening to other stories and creating something in response to what I've heard, I believe for myself, it's all geared towards going in and deep down, going down into the ground and that being the arena for the kinds of change that I think have a very deep and palpable impact, even if they don't make the headlines. And even if you know, me showing up and paying attention, a human being, anybody showing up and paying attention to a new little seedling, cracking through the cement and being moved by the tenacity of life.
A little seedling popping through cracks in the cement. Beautiful.
Okay, now picture that cement being some kind of system or oppressive social structure parts of society have been built around. I'm
trying, but it kind of sounds like you're getting all poetic on us here. Where are you going with this?
Yeah, it's a little abstract. Where I'm actually going is to meet someone who's taken that metaphorical seedling and turned it into a tree.
Hi, my name is Carla Stevenson, and I am a systems disruptor and someone who imagines a future that can be very different than this one.
I sat down with Carla in her Weimar office, and she drew me a diagram of all the projects her nonprofit society works on, Renaissance Arts and Sustainability Society.
And it looked like a tree, more poetry, I'm guessing.
More like a very impressive octopus. Here's Carla drawing it out.
So we have a nonprofit society called Renaissance, and the short form is RAS, because it's Renaissance Arts and Sustainability Society. Okay. And it was made in 2014, and our goals are dual goals of supporting the arts and supporting sustainability in small spaces, in rural spaces. So one of the things that we do is the Tiny Lights Festival. I'm going to write this down as I'm talking to you. That's one of the things that live under this. The other thing that lives under it is the studio project, which I'm going to show you, which is a living art studio. The other thing that lives under it is this piece of land that I'm going to show you. And the other thing that lives under it is rail.
I'm familiar with the Tiny Lights Festival. It's a real beauty out there in Weimar. But what's rail?
Rural Arts Inclusion Lab.
Sounds kind of sci-fi.
I guess they're both reimagining a different future, but rail is not at all fictional. It was originally built to address systems that leave out marginalized voices from arts organizations, audiences, and performers in rural BC.
Trying to create some more cracks in the cement?
Yeah, and rail has even more branches or tentacles, all of which are working to create spaces where people can practice being in a space with people who've had different lived experiences.
So one of the big reasons that I do this work, or one of the only reasons I do this work, is because I really deeply believe with climate change, we're going to see mass populations moving around the world. And I think that there is a lot of challenge in rural spaces, especially rural industrial-based spaces, where there's a lot of racism, and it's really difficult. I feel like the more we can help make the soil of those places more welcoming and more inclusive, we're going to do better.
Sounds like she believes artists can lead the way towards social change.
Mm-hmm. Carla has shared lots of ways artist-driven initiatives have resulted in real change. She calls the Tiny Lights Music Festival a living lab of how we can live into our values. It's basically re-envisioned the way a small-town festival can be.
What does it look like when we can revitalize a space that is like an old community hall that's falling down, or like an old schoolhouse that's falling down? What does it look like when we can actually animate those spaces with new kinds of conversations and new kinds of people?
Carla says one of the ways they do this is by making sure their lineup has equitable representation.
You can't be what you can't see, right? So queer kids who are living in spaces like this don't have any examples to see, right? And pretty much if you look at it, we get 580 applications this year. Of those, I would say the majority are white men with guitars or white bands with guitars. And to actually have parity of women on stages or gender diverse people on stages is, if you start looking at lineups of festivals, that alone is something. And so if you start thinking about how we can do that and what the kids and what the people of our little place get to benefit from.
So I'm starting to get the sense here that Carla does a million different things.
And as Carla kept pointing out, so much of her work is about seeing the relational aspects between everything.
And to hold all the various pieces and see how they're interconnected, that takes a pretty creative mind.
Yeah. So while I was in Weimar, Carla took me to a plot of land her society had recently bought. The future home of a new artist center they're going to build right at the edge of town.
But it goes all the way back here. It's a big triangle. So it goes all the way back. It goes so far. It goes so incredibly far.
It was rainy, the knee-high grass was super drippy, and she went striding through the wet field, pointing out where everything was going to go.
And back there's a historic apple trees. And then this is how the sun rises, like this way. When you're coming into Weimar, it'll be this, gentle, you won't really be able to see it over this curve. And then it was this beautiful glass light that's going to go through the whole thing. And it's going to be really big and beautiful.
I'm just going to come out and say it. Every community needs a Carla, or three.
On that note, I want to introduce one more person.
Let me guess, someone whose art is a catalyst for change.
Someone whose art helps to deepen connections across so many levels.
Hi, my name is Smokey Sumac. Hunene Tunaka. I am from a Kiskunuk First Nation, which is in the what we know as Fairmont area, Columbia Basin.
Smokey's a poet, a PhD candidate in Indigenous Studies, and he just started working with youth at the Foundry Health Center in Cranbrook. His next book is a collection of 100 poems he wrote for Palestine, a global issue he says he just couldn't turn his back on.
And so in witnessing this, I was like, I have to do something. And so I just started writing poems because that's this role I take up in community. And so through that, it was like what I saw, I would write a poem. So there's sort of this journalistic piece to it, which is what we're being begged to do, right? Palestinians are calling on us to speak. And so I thought, this is my role. I'm a poet. I will speak.
These poems, which started as Instagram posts, will be a book by next spring, with all royalties going to Palestinian life.
I'm interested in how he says poetry is the role he takes up in his community.
Yeah, and poetry is something Smokey has really stayed true to. Here he is talking about sticking to his path.
I sort of used to make this joke when I met administrators, because they would say to me like, oh, I used to be a poet. And I would say, well, what happened? Right. And then, some of them would have this moment of like, oh, right. And I teased a lot, but then I found myself where those two roads opened up, where in order to lead your nation, you should be a director and you should have budgets and you should do these things. And it might kill your creativity, but we're okay with that because we need somebody to do this.
Killing creativity was not for Smokey.
There is just someone in me that was just screaming like, we can't kill this. I can't put that part to rest to become something else. And I think more of us need to listen to that, because when we listen to it, we can create new ways of leading the change.
Smokey and I talked about another project he recently worked on, one that not only made connections between artists, it brought his near and far communities closer together. It's called How to Lose Everything, an animated series produced by Krista Couture, with 5 videos, all done by Indigenous writers and Indigenous animators. Smokey got asked to animate one of his poems.
An animated poem, cool. So what is that like? I imagine we watch it on YouTube or...
Yeah, you can watch it on CBC Gem. So here's a short clip. You'll hear Smokey reading part of his poem, There Are Hierarchies of Grief, a poem for mothers who have lost children. It's illustrated by Meki Ottawa with a soundtrack by G.R. Grit. Smokey says he tears up every time he hears the opening bars. And I get it.
On days like these, my heart thinks of you. When the rest of the world grieves for a world they think is gone. When we've awoken to a nightmare we didn't think was possible. When I'm afraid that I can't make it to the next sunrise and I don't know if the tears will ever stop. When smiling seems like it might be a failure.
There's another thing. This collaboration didn't end with artists. Smokey got asked to translate his poem into Tanaha, a process he says helped to deepen his understanding of grief. He says that having his poem translated highlighted how important it is to create connection, especially because colonization brought about severe disconnection.
In this process, I have recognized that when we're in survival mode, we need the artist the most, but we don't necessarily understand that. And through this project, bringing these pieces to the elders group, I began to see a new understanding of what creativity can do. And in our conversations about translation, what I really appreciated was starting to learn how to think in Tunaja in different ways, where it's not just about thinking in the language. And so those connections and that community that we built around this, it helped me understand the value of the words and the value of bringing the conversation to them. Just being able to reconnect to my culture and my languages is really life-giving, because that's what at its heart is decolonization, is when we can foster relationships to those things that were taken from us.
Ya kakaki na akin miet at kukum na kanelwitek at kneslwi tiatisni kakilwi.
I love how even without being able to understand the language, I can still get a sense of it. Very powerful.
Mm-hmm. And I'd recommend spending time with the full poem in both languages. For this work to find its place in the world, Smokey had to really believe in the power of art.
It can be difficult, but I think for myself, it just comes back to aligning with my heart. So for Tunaka, we say knowledge is in our hearts, akitwi. And so it's coming back to that alignment where I'm not questioning the action anymore.
Thanks so much for this, Emily. Great work. To dream up a big art project is one thing, but to make it happen is another, especially if the dream is to bring over 100 people high into the Alpine to perform on a remote glacier. That's exactly what happened just over 10 years ago in the mighty Purcell mountain range. Emily Nielsen has that story.
Of all the likely things one may encounter on a glacier, a drum kit is not one of them. Even less likely, a 55-piece choir and orchestra. But in 2013, backcountry hikers to the Farnham Glacier, about 35 kilometers west of Invermere as the crow flies, would have stumbled upon this exact scene. Had it been me, my first thought would have been, who on earth thought this up?
My name is Paul Wald, and I'm an artist living in the Kwanghan Territory in Victoria, BC.
Meet Paul Wald. Paul creates sound and video installations informed by the landscape. One of the works he's best known for is Requiem for a Glacier, a 39-minute sound and video installation that memorializes the Jumbo Glacier area. In 2011, Paul got a call from the curator of Caslow's Langham Cultural Center, then Kiara Lynch, inviting him to present a work he'd previously made, Northern Symphony. This work translated gnawed markings on a tree felled by beavers into things like wallpaper, furniture, a string quartet composition. There's also an outhouse turned into a mini art gallery.
Once we realized that it would be very difficult for me to ship that work out there, I started talking to Kira about creating a new work. I was really interested in doing something around climate change and noticed that there was some glaciers in the area. At that point, I had never been to that part of BC before. And Kira was the one who recommended that we explore the idea of doing something around Jumbo, which was a huge issue at the time.
Huge. No, colossal. At that point, Jumbo was one of the region's most collectively charged environmental issues. In 1991, a proposed 4-season mega ski resort dreamt of running lifts up 4 glaciers in the Jumbo Valley. By the time Paul began brainstorming this art installation, communities in both the East and West Kootenay had already spent decades fighting to keep the resort out. Paul admits when he agreed to make Jumbo the venue, he didn't fully understand what it would entail or just how remote the area was.
So I knew that Kira wanted something that had music involved in it, and I really wanted to expand on that idea and try to create something that would challenge me as an artist. So I came up with this idea of doing a requiem.
A requiem. In musical terms, a composition that honors the dead.
And Kira said, great, that sounds awesome. And I said, I'd like to perform it on the glacier. And she said, great, that sounds awesome. And, at that point, it's just an idea and you have no idea what it's going to entail. And then you start figuring things out as they come up. Like, how are we going to get people there? Where are we going to do it? What's involved? How much is it going to cost? And those are the things that kind of unwound as the work developed.
After Paul composed the work, it took many months of planning before they felt ready to pull it off. They connected with the Jumbo Wild campaign and were taken into the Jumbo Valley by two locals, Pat and Biba Morrow.
We did all the pre-staging rehearsals in Nelson, and then we did a couple of dress rehearsals in one of the churches in Nelson, and then set off for Windermere, which is where we stayed. And it just so happened I had a friend who was a principal of the elementary school there and let us take over the whole school and use it as our base camp. So, there was a lot of things that just kind of happened that were very fortuitous that really made this possible.
Paul says the piece was written and performed for the glacier. It wishes it an eternal afterlife and discusses causes of death, which include the buildup of atmospheric carbon dioxide. The piece also converts information such as temperature records for the area into music notation, and it has a Latin translation of the BC government's press release announcing approval of the year-round resort. In the clip you're about to hear, imagine a woman dressed in black, wearing sporty sunglasses, in a harness, attached to a rope, taking determined yet hesitant steps while crossing the glacier. Oh, all while holding a sheet of music, singing. This scene, the culmination of much work and planning, creates an experience for the viewer that Paul says is about giving people time with their thoughts, to be given information in a non-didactic way that hopefully ends up being motivational.
That kind of subtlety and nuance is something that is much more conducive to art than direct action. In direct action, you want your message to come across much quicker. And you want people to be very clear about your stance.
So, where are things at with Jumbo now? Over 10 years have passed. Requiem for Glacier has been shown pretty much non-stop in galleries in the Kootenays, across Canada, Paris, the UK. And the good news is the area itself has been protected. In early 2020, it was declared the Katmuk Indigenous Protected and Conserved Area, stewarded by the Kootenay Nation. Of course, the glacier itself is still threatened by climate change, but that's a whole other episode. As for Paul, let's just say he's taking on another glacial-sized challenge.
In many ways, what I'm working on now is a follow-up to Requiem. I'm writing an opera for the Old Growth Forest on Vancouver Island and hope to perform that in the Old Growth Forest next summer. And so I'm finishing up the writing of the opera as we speak, and then working on all the other details that go into pulling off a project like this. So I feel like I'm in Requiem mode all over again.
That's right, Requiem mode. If that's a mode that contributes to change, even in a subtle or indirect way, I'm all for it.
We're going to close with an artist whose work is not only informed by the environment, but also created with it. Genevieve Robertson is a Nelson-based visual artist who often uses found materials, such as coal, graphite, and wildfire-derived ash, to make art.
So I moved here in 2018, and I'd been working with this kind of process of found materials and using them as pigments in drawing, and using the process of collecting materials as a way to explore different regions.
Genevieve's interest in carbon-based art materials is not just because they make a great pigment, they also allow her to explore issues like climate change and, in her words, the origins of primordial matter across geologic time. And with that, we're going to give Genevieve the final word.
I don't like to expect art to do a lot. Like, I think its value is innately, for artists anyway, and I think for people who appreciate art, there is value in just making and witnessing art. We don't live in a culture where that's really clear, but I think there is. And I think that for me it seems like a pitfall to try to expect your art to like actively produce change, but hopefully that change happens and you're kind of part of like a cultural wave that is hard to see when you're in the middle of it. But, you know, if you look back at art movements, it's clear that there was a mirror to understand the world at the time, and it's much clearer in the rearview mirror. Like, I love art history because you're learning about history, but it's just through the lenses of people's, how they were viewing it.
And that's our podcast on Art for Change. Thanks to our reporter for this episode, Emily Nielsen. For more stories, episodes, and behind-the-scenes photography, head over to our website, headwaterspodcast.com. The Headwaters is created by the folks at Kootenay Mountain Culture Productions and brought to you by Columbia Basin Trust. To find out more about all the good things the Trust does when it comes to supporting people and communities in the Columbia Basin, visit ourtrust.org. I'm Mitchell Scott, and to all the freaky people out there that make the beauty of the world, thanks for listening.